Thank you. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here. My name is Dr. Jay Corbin. I am a clinical psychologist. I've been working in Clarksville since 1979. I spent 15 years of that time as the ranking psychologist at Fort Campbell. And I'm sure as Mayor Piper, who knows me, knows that whenever there have been issues that have been important to the city of Clarksville, I have been willing to speak out for and against. I live in Plantation Estates, which is 2.5 miles from the raceway, and the noise can definitely be heard. On nice, pleasant evenings during spring, summer, fall, I am forced to lower my windows. One of my concerns is that if this extension is allowed, I will be living with my windows closed for all night. I'm not the only one with this concern. There are many neighborhoods already developed and many more going up in the neighborhood. And my concern is really for what is good for the city of Clarksville, and I don't think this is going to benefit us. The extension of the noise into the morning hours and the increase in traffic are, for me, good reasons to vote against this proposal. The decision you have before you, to me, is not about what is in the best interests of Clarksville. From my perception, and my perception only, this is about money and the benefit of a select few. And I would request that you ask yourself, before you vote, what would you like in your neighborhoods? And I would think you would decide to not include a noisy raceway. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Corbin. Yeah. Doug, will you make sure that microphone's on, and if you need to, thank you, Chuck. I think it is. Can you, how about moving the stand in and putting that on the other side of the stand? Is that stand moving? Slide this forward. Thank you. Also, before, as Ms. Carol Ballard is coming forward, also by rule, this is not an engagement of discussion. This is a time for you, those who called in, to be able to express your opinion without engagement by the council or others. So if Ms. Carol Ballard would come forward.
Climbing those stairs was a real challenge, but I was bound and determined to be here.
Ms. Ballard, we have a
I didn't realize that. He told me when I got up.
Elevator on this end.
I am here. I have lived in Clarksville 7.5 years. I am a retired public health nurse, working over 33 years with the state. I oppose the amendment because of the excessive noise that accumulates in the neighborhood. I'm also 2.5, 3 miles from the racetrack, and there are times when I am sitting in my house with the doors and windows shut, and it is so loud I can't hear the television. That's very disturbing, especially on a summer night when the sound carries. And I have several comments I'd like to make. There are several comments that have been made in the newspaper about people in the neighborhoods knowing that the racetrack is there. I doubt very much that many of those people know the racetrack was there when they bought their houses. Otherwise, they wouldn't be complaining now about the noise. I am real concerned about the continued residential development in that area. It just blows my mind that the Planning Commission approves residential development right next to a noisy racetrack. That was very hard for me to comprehend. So I was wondering what the long-range plan is for this issue. I think the owner, when he bought it, knew that it was in the middle of a development area, and I would expect that he might have anticipated some problems, but there certainly are. I would like to suggest a couple of compromises. If you're going to complain, you better have some solutions, right? Have people made any ideas about daytime racing? Now, I know that noise is noise, but I like to sleep at night, and I always feel better the next day after I get a good night's sleep. What is the possibility of developing some specialized daytime racing? And don't tell me it won't work until you try it. Have the owner make a good faith effort. How about midday madness instead of midnight madness? People do need their rest in the evening. Needmore Road is a narrow, winding, twisting road.
Follow the same rules out here as you do inside.
It has no shoulders. I am real concerned about public safety. Part of that road is not well lit at night. If you have driven down there at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, you're pouring more people out on the road at the time. Daytime, what about the consideration for special designated late-night racing? Labor Day, Memorial Day, period, end of report. And publicize that those races are going to be late. That might be a compromise that we could be considered. I would really like to see the daytime racing explored a little bit before we go into this daylight. The nighttime, I really oppose the extension because of the noise. It's awful out there. And again, would you want the racetrack in your backyard? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Ballard. Okay. Mr. John McConnell.
Thank you for letting me speak. My name is John McConnell. I'm a co-owner of Clarksville Speedway. First, what I'd like to bring up, we talked about this before, is the cars that are running late at night are the street legal vehicles. These are the same vehicles. If they're not on the racetrack, they're on our streets of Clarksville anyway. The lady was right. Needmore Road is a windy road with no shoulders on it. Do we want our kids driving up and down that road at night instead of in a controlled environment? She's right about that. I think having an environment where they're controlled and watched, I mean, that's very important. If they're not on Needmore Road, they're going to be on Wilma Rudolph. How many innocent people are going to be killed? We've seen it in the past from the kids drag racing up and down the streets. Here they are supervised. That's pretty much my main issue there. These cars, like I said, are street legal. If you're not going to let them run on the track, how can you let them run on the streets of Clarksville? I think we have to ask ourselves that. They're no louder than the helicopters we hear coming from Fort Campbell. I think if you put a decibel meter in the yards of these neighborhoods out there, you'll find that these cars aren't affecting these residences as much as the cars driving right up and down their streets, right in front of their houses. I think maybe you should explore that a little further before you cast a vote on that. That's pretty much all I have to say on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McConnell. Okay, Mr. William Scoggin.
If they didn't use all their 5 minutes, can I use them? Oh. All right. Well, I got notes everywhere. First of all, I'd like to appreciate them coming out speaking their opinion. Their opinion does mean a lot. I do understand it. But the thing I got to say is when they bought their house, they had to know there's a racetrack there. We're not hid in the bushes. We are front and center on Needmore Road. I've cleaned it up. I spent a ton of money trying to make it where it's better for everybody. Second of all, when Councilman Allen proposed this noise ordinance, it just isn't fair or right for the racetrack. The racetrack's been there 45 years. I don't know of a lot of other businesses in Clarksville that's been there 45 years. I can go back and tell you we've generated more than $100 million for this community. Anybody know that? Second of all, when I purchased the racetrack, I went through the city to make sure that I could do what I needed to do to make a living doing this. I did that. I have abided by the rules. I do not let loud cars run past midnight. Now, Mr. Allen, when we finally sat down and spoke about it, I told him I sat with the city some 6 years ago, and we had an underlying agreement. The problem he had with it, an agreement with the city that wasn't written on paper wasn't worth a dime. I find it hard to believe. I cannot believe a gentleman's agreement right now isn't good. It's got to be written in law. That's our problem right now. We got too many laws. In all due respect to the neighbors, I promise you, I respect them. I I really do. I try not to let anything run past 12 o'clock. You can ask any of my racers. We have over 250 people here tonight. They're lined up out the door. We don't have room to put them in here. The only side note to our little agreement was the Midnight Madness, because if anything, you people ought to be getting me a grant to do this. I'm saving lives on the streets. I'm giving our youth and our military somewhere to come and control the atmosphere instead of running up and down 41A, Wilma Rudolph, or whichever road they want to run up and down. You would not believe the amount of people that come to me and say, hey, this is a good thing you're doing. I promise you, you can ask the chief. We don't have no trouble out there with any kind of violence or anything else. The worst we have is a fender bender. I feel by doing this show is the best thing for the city. You talk about what's good for the city. They was talking about people in the city. This is in the city. I didn't choose it to be in the city. That's just the way it is. I can't help it. The neighborhoods are around us. Mr. Allen has lived in this neighborhood. You lived around us for 38 years. You knew the racetrack was there. I mean, you told me that the house is right across the street. They bulldozed down. That's where your family lived. I mean, we hadn't been hid. Most polls that's been out there, the Leaf Chronicle, 80% of the people that voted in said we should not be regulated. WJZM had a poll. 100% said we shouldn't be regulated. Our petition online, 6,000 people have signed this petition from every ward in here. I mean, the numbers grow. You know, Mr. Allen, I know there's probably people that oppose the noise thing, but I got people, Neil and C.C. Grissom, Cedar Springs, Randy Hesse, Needmore, Marlon Moreland, Berrywood Circle, Eli Roach, Wynwood Road, Charlie Regents. I've been out in the city. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, I can sit here and read names all night. As soon as he brought this up, I went through the neighborhoods and talked to people. Nobody had a problem. They were sitting on their porches, drinking alcohol, listening to the car, and said, you know what, we know it's here. We enjoy listening to them. And yes, sometimes you can hear them. It does depend which way the wind's blowing. And this was at 12 o'clock on a Friday night when I started Midnight Madness after Mr. Allen brought it up. I went to his community, set at a stop sign, listened, drove to the next stop sign. Sometimes you could hear, sometimes you could. But every person that I run across that was sitting on their front porch, I got out of my truck and went up. And you know what one told me? My truck's in the middle of the road, and a car come by. It couldn't go by. It had to stop. He said, you know what, I'd like to thank you for having your car there because people fly up and down these roads all the time. He said, that's the first time I've seen them stop. He said, but the racetrack, and this is directly right behind the racetrack, no more than 400 yards from the racetrack, straight through the woods. So we don't have a problem with the racetrack. So I think y'all got better things to do besides worry about a 45-year-old business that's been in business and trying to do things for the kids and have a, you know, we don't have much in this town. What do we got? Oh, that's right. We don't have anything but the racetrack. We don't, I mean, we got Austin P. They play football, basketball, baseball, but anything else, what else we got? Honestly, I'm not trying to be a nuisance to the people around us, but I just feel it's really, really, really bad that we have to go through this when I have done my homework. And getting back to the young lady saying we tried day races, I've tried moving the Midnight Madness show to the day. Y'all all was kids one time. I know all y'all about 26. But when we were growing up, because I'm y'all's age, we used to go down Riverside Drive and sit. They have nowhere to do this now because if they go down there now, they're loitering, they're going to be put in jail. They come to the racetrack. If cars are not going down the racetrack, they sit there and they talk. They sit there and they look at each other. They don't have anything else to do but come right out there and have a good time doing it. I appreciate your vote. Another thing, everybody for the racetrack, please stand up. Not to mention the 150 lined up out the door. I told you, when you fill the room up, you build a bigger room when you fill it up. I appreciate your vote. No, I promise you, I'll work with any city official and do anything I can. Another thing, the BWC just had their toy run out there. But y'all give them a permission to run at 2 o'clock. All right, that's all I got to say. Thank y'all. Appreciate your vote. No.
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome you to the regular session of the Clarksville City Council, October the 1st, 2009. This time you need to silence all cell phones and pagers. ladies and gentlemen, from this point on, there is no applauding, no outburst, no talking among yourselves, no celebrating your victory or your agony of defeat. There's gonna be no warnings. If you do any of those, I will escort you out to the street immediately. Thank you in advance for your cooperation. And that also goes to the people outside.
Okay. Y'all ready? Clarksville City Council regular session, October the 1st, 2009. Please come to order. We've asked Council Lady Barbara Johnson to lead us in the prayer tonight and Councilman Joel Wallace to lead us in the pledge. Please rise.
Gracious Father, as we bow here, thanking you for the many blessings that you bestowed upon us. We thank thee, Heavenly Father, for allowing us to be here tonight. It wasn't anything that we've done good. It's all because of your mercy. Watch over us, Heavenly Father, as we do what's best for the city of Clarksville. Be with the mayor and these council members, Heavenly Father, and all who have gathered here under the presence of my voice. Be with the men and women on the battlefield, Heavenly Father, send them safely home to their families, loved ones, and watch over the ones that left behind. Be with our chief of the nation, Heavenly Father, our life. Watch over him, dear God. These blessings we ask in your name, I pray. Amen. Amen.
Okay, once again, thank those of you that have spoken tonight. Thank you for coming out and exercising your right to be able to let your voice be heard. Our procedure is that we have an executive session on the Thursday prior to the first Thursday of the month, at which time there is a spirited debate for many of these that we are going to be talking about tonight. And so I know I speak on behalf of the council. Thank each of you for exercising your right and privilege for coming out and showing up and being heard. Unless there's an objection from the council, I'm going to ask that we move public safety in front of the zoning to be able to hear this particular case and move forward. Are there any objections? In that case, Mr. Grubbs, Public Safety Chairman. Excuse me. Oh, thank you. Please press your selection for your attendance. And Ms. Johnson, does Barbara show up on it? Okay. Also, before we start, in addition to that, I want to announce that the City of Clarksville's IT department has just completed the conversion of our entire internal city network over to Clarksville Department of Electricity light band. As a result of this conversion, using the products that we provided through Clarksville Department of Electricity, the city is saving $171,000 per year in communications costs by using CDE light band versus the standard provider used in the past by the city. We plan next to convert over to use CDE light band for internet access and encourage all other citizens to do so. This change, when completed, will result in additional savings of $28,000 per year for the city of Clarksville. Councilman Grubbs.
Thank you, Mayor. We have ordinance 31, 2009-10, amending the official code relative to the anti-noise regulation. At this time, I'll ask Councilman Allen to talk about this ordinance.
You going to make a motion for it to go through?
And motion is for approval.
And a motion and second for approval of ordinance 31. Mr. Allen, you want to speak to that?
You gotta cut me off.
You're on.
Oh.
Try you again. You're on now.
All right. First of all, I just want to say, pertaining to those that race, and I think we have to get a clarification. There are some issues. First of all, I am not against the racetrack. I am not against those who race. I'm not saying that it's not good for the city. It doesn't bring in revenue. I'm not saying that children, whomever that wants to run, shouldn't be able to run. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that when I ran for office, the number one complaint was the racetrack. The number one complaint was the racetrack. It has not let up since. I thought that there was an ordinance on the books that designated the stop time for the racetrack. So I was always under the assumption that it was 12 o'clock. And I thought, well, if I win this election, I'll make sure, I made the promise that I would make sure that they're supposed to stop at 12 o'clock, then we'll make sure that they stop at 12 o'clock. There were many that thought that the track should be shut down. There's still many that think that the track should be shut down. Didn't belong in our neighborhood. My sentiments are just like you all's. It's been there 40 years. It's been there. It was there when we moved there. And no, I have not lived there 38 years. I've only been there 5 years. But I've been in Clarksville all my life. After being elected, I found out that there was nothing on the books, that the racetrack could run as long as they want to, however they wanted to. Well, I thought a good compromise would be for the racetrack to cut off at a certain time, and that way the people, some that want it shut down, they didn't get their way. The racetrack not getting their way. It's called a compromise. It's called the racetrack being able to stay there, the people still being able to race, and also the citizens being satisfied with the fact that, hey, there's something on the books, it is what it is, we have to tolerate it. Sat down and talked with Mr. Scoggin. After drafting up an ordinance, this ordinance was taken directly from the state law that Sevierville uses for their racetrack. They had the same problem we had. They drafted up this law so that the racetrack and the community could live in harmony. I thought, good law, good thing, sounds good to me. Lance, let's work on it. Bring the proposal. Mr. Scoggin says, well, you didn't talk to me. I sat down and talked with Mr. Scoggin over 2.5 hours. He explained to me his process. He explained to me how everything worked. My original time was mirrored after Sevierville's law, which was 11 o'clock. I said, all right, Mr. Scoggin, what about 12:30? I said, 12:30. He says, give me 1 o'clock. I said, well, no, you're not meeting me. I started at 11, and I gave you an hour and a half, and you're not meeting me, you're not making any type of concession. He said, you give me 1 o'clock, and you'll never hear from me. I won't fight it. I won't do anything. Those were his words. I went to the Public Safety Committee. It was also there that he said 1 o'clock. Give me 1 o'clock. Give me 1 o'clock. Well, it passed through the Public Safety Committee, and now I'm hearing, well, we don't want any regulations. We don't want anything. What I think is fair is it's for the citizens to be able to sleep at night, as well as the racetrack to remain open and people still be able to run. I fail to believe that if a person has to stop racing at 12:30, or I think Councilman Reed suggested 1 o'clock. I think Councilwoman Johnson said, what about 1 o'clock? Even at 1 o'clock, if they have to stop at 1 o'clock, I don't think that's going to hurt anybody to have to stop racing at 1 o'clock. I'm not saying shut the track down. I'm not saying anything but stop at a reasonable hour. That way, the citizens, guess what? There's something on the books, so when they call me, look, it's on the books. They have till 1 o'clock. Now, the only problem we have is if they run after one. If they run after one, then they'll be breaking the law if this passes. And I think that's only fair for the citizens as well as for the racetrack. You know, this area is going to continue to grow. Make no mistake about it. It is going to continue to grow. And I think this ordinance really does more to help the racetrack than it does to hurt the racetrack, because with nothing on the books, the next person that decides to run for this seat may decide he wants to listen to the constituents that say shut it down. He may push to shut it down. I'm not trying to shut him down. I really believe that the present noise ordinance, which does not exclude the racetrack, is enough to shut him down. And had that been my objective, I would have never proposed this amendment I would have just insisted that we enforce the present noise ordinance. What this does, it's a fair compromise. I've been willing to compromise, been willing to sit down, been willing to talk, and, you know, I understand that there are a lot of people who have been miseducated, and I can tell they're miseducated when they come up and tell me, my kid races, and you shouldn't try to shut down the racetrack. Like, I'm not trying to shut down the racetrack. All I'm saying is I'm trying to say your kid needs to be done racing by 1 o'clock so that the people in the area can go to sleep. It's fair. Compromise. That's all. Fair compromise. That's all I appreciate your support if it was in your ward. If it was in your ward and your constituents were speaking, the number one issue was the racetrack, how would you handle it? That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Yes, Mayor. If I could start with Mr. Baker. Mr. Baker, could you please give me the legal side, make sure we're clear even going into this with a noise ordinance that we already have on the books. This ordinance here is definitely singling out the racetrack. And my question is, to clarify what Mr. Allen just said, that the noise ordinance that we have on the books right now would currently be in effect, and it wouldn't be. The reason being, this is classified as a racetrack. What comes along with a racetrack is noise. The same thing what comes along with an airport. So when we govern this, discussing noise, we can't single out that's my question. Will we be singling out the racetrack, or is this a noise ordinance? Because if it is, it will affect airports also.
Well, it's a noise ordinance, but it's a particular provision of the noise ordinance that deals with use of vehicles and types. And the way it reads now really turns on whether or not this racing is conducted on a licensed or approved track. And I don't know if Mr. Scoggins is licensed or approved. There is state law that governs racetracks. The racetracks have to be licensed. I'm not sure if it applies to him. He may have been grandfathered. But the way I read it, I don't believe it really would stop him from racing now if he is licensed or approved.
My question is pertaining to noise. What's the difference of a licensed racetrack versus an airport? Because if we're discussing noise,
This does not.
well, I understand this doesn't apply to airports, but my question is, if we pass this, we're isolating racetracks, but I'm saying it's going to have to, or we're going to have to amend the airport noise also. No.
Well,
if this passes, I'll come next month with the airport with the same literature. I mean, is that what we want to do, or do we have a good defense to use that if we go down this road, is my question.
There are federal laws that deal with airports, and I don't know exactly what the specifics are, but that would have some impact on it, and you may not be able to do as much regulation. You may not be able to regulate it at all. But this does not, this specific provision that you're talking about amending here tonight, it just doesn't deal with airports. And that's something that y'all could take up if you wanted to. I'd have to research it to see if you really had that power, or if you're already preempted by either state or, more likely, federal law.
And well, maybe Mr. Scoggin can answer that. Is he licensed, Mayor? Maybe that's
No,
because.
so you can't bring Mr. Scoggins.
Well, I'm trying to find out if he's licensed or not.
You can direct Mr. Baker.
Mr. Baker, then
Yeah.
that answers my question. If he is licensed, then I'm trying to clarify what Mr. Allen
Yeah.
said, then the noise side is, it's with it. It tags on, just like you said with the airport. With the airport, aircrafts, noise, it goes together. So if he's licensed as a racetrack at the state level, then the noise is accepted as a racetrack.
Well-
How could you have a racetrack with no noise?
We're just, whether he's licensed or not, that's something that's governed by state law. But it's clear that cities have the police power to promulgate reasonable rules and regulations that concern health and welfare of their citizens. And one of those things, it's been upheld numerous times that they can pass anti-noise type of ordinances. But, when you get into the specific details of what that ordinance says, then you may run into different, issues, legal issues. The way our ordinance is written, it starts out real general, talks about, noises that are bad for people, basically, are prohibited. And then it goes into specifics, and it says, these types of noises, we're finding as a council, we're making a finding that these specific types of noises are bad and are prohibited. And one of those is this section dealing with use of vehicles and types. But it talks about, racing, motor vehicles and racing, but then it says, basically says, motor vehicle racing, that type of noise is prohibited, but then it has the ending clause that says, unless conducted on licensed or approved tracks.
Mark, would you allow me to say something? Let's assume, for argument's sake, tonight, that he is a licensed racetrack. Let's assume that, so we'll take that off the table. And so now we don't have to discuss it. We're going to assume that that's correct. If it's incorrect, then William has another problem. But for the sake of this argument tonight, that's off the table. We're going to all assume that he's licensed. Now, what's our next question?
Then with that being said, then that answers my question toward what Mr. Allen said in reference to being grandfathered, the agreements, and everything else, because that one statement there covers it all. It covers it all. It is a racetrack. It is a licensed racetrack, which means there will be noise. So everything about the agreements, the grandfathers, none of that matters, because the council knowing that it is a racetrack, it encompasses noise. That was the only question I had for you, Mr. Baker, pertaining to that, just to answer Mr. Allen. But there were a couple more things that we must touch on, that during the public hearing that was mentioned, I definitely...
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Baker. I definitely prefer to have a controlled environment at the racetrack for Midnight Madness than to be on 41A. We're totally aware of what took place several months ago with two individuals racing on 41A. I would definitely wouldn't want to increase that. So by having a controlled environment on Nebo Road is definitely a better environment than Madison, Riverside, and other places. Another thing, we talk about noise. These vehicles are all muffled vehicles. I can't emphasize on that enough. Meaning after 12 o'clock, there are no dragsters running, there are no drag bikes running, there are no race cars running. They're all street legal vehicles that are running at that racetrack after 12 o'clock on a Friday night. And let me just touch on what type of vehicles. There are Corvettes, 2009. And my point is, the reason why I'm naming some of the vehicles, a lot of these individuals are military soldiers who have saved year after year to buy the Magnum RTs, the Hemis, and so forth, the new Camaros. These vehicles are designed to run at a high rate of speed that you can never accelerate on 41A at 45 miles an hour, nor the interstate at 70 miles an hour. But you can put it on the racetrack at 12 o'clock with a muffler and perform that vehicle what it's capable of doing. So with that, we must keep in mind that we must support the soldiers, because a lot of soldiers utilize that and they look forward to that throughout a lot of the other things that they don't take advantage of. Discussing sleep. There are a lot of individuals are interrupted with sleep for whatever reasons. I live next to a fire station. I live on 2nd Street by Austin P. I can tell you every home game they have and so forth. Talking about being disturbed of sleep when it's football season or so forth. But my main concern is safety. If we have a controlled environment where these kids or individuals, not necessarily kids, are on a racetrack, it's a lot better than having them on the street. So I think we definitely need to let the racetrack keep conducting business and supporting the city the way they have in the past, because the inconvenience of the constituents who's contacting you, in all due respect, I know you're receiving phone calls. You wouldn't believe the phone calls I receive for different issues in my ward. So we all receive phone calls, but I think this one here, the outweight of it is the city benefits a lot more than if we were to change that.
I would ask the council also tonight, if you make sure that you make all your points when your time comes up. I don't anticipate going back and rehashing things tonight, so make sure you make all your points. And as we move on to others, when we get to the end, we will move on to the vote. Okay, so Mr. Harris, are you through? Okay. Mr.
Yes,
Forrester?
The businesses such as the loudspeakers at automobile shops and whatever, racetrack, businesses like that was not in consideration. It was not to be considered in the noise ordinance. Those kind of businesses were not targeted at all. So, just for the information.
Okay. Ms. McLaughlin?
When ordinance 31 was presented to us last Thursday, it was presented to us as being a better option for Mr. Scoggins' business, because if we didn't have this ordinance, he would be held subject to the noise ordinance. Well, according to Mr. Baker, Section E, small section I, says that licensed racetracks are not subject to the noise ordinance. So ordinance 31 is not a better deal for Mr. Scoggins. His business has been there for over 40 years. They were there first. Let's leave them alone.
Okay. Ms. Barbara Johnson?
Yes, I think Councilman Allen misunderstood me when he told me that I was supporting the 1 o'clock. I asked you if Mr. Scoggins had agreed to 1 o'clock. That was a answer to your reply. Yes. I didn't say that I was supporting 1 o'clock. I just wanted to know if he was supporting 1 o'clock.
I'm going to allow you to, okay, because of this controversy on this matter, so, okay, but that's okay, appreciate you not.
That's
Are you
it.
through, Ms. Johnson?
I'm through,
Okay,
yes.
Mr. Joel Wallace?
Thanks, Mayor. If I could ask Mr. Baker a couple more questions. So, sort of just shifting away, I think, what we were talking about earlier with the noise ordinance, but, I mean, do you think that enactment of this ordinance could open us up as a city to any sort of future litigation?
Councilman, I really would rather not, telegraph to potential litigants against the city what theories they might be able to pursue against us. I would really rather do this in a non-public meeting with just me and the council. As you know, the Sunshine Law obviously is on the books and applies. And it's been interpreted through case law that if you're in a pending lawsuit, your attorney can meet with the council, and it doesn't have to be a public meeting. And it's been extended to say that if something is so controversial or becomes so controversial that it's likely to lead to litigation, then that also there can be a meeting between the attorney and the council members, non-public. With that said, I'll try to answer your question in a way without, possibly opening the door. There's really just two things, I guess I would say that, well, let me say this. One, we talked about this last week in executive session, and that there is that possibility that anytime you pass rules and regulations that affect landowners' rights, then there's a possibility that if you go so far in restricting their ability to use their land in the way they want to, that at some point it can go so far that it becomes a regulatory taking. And in fact, an inverse condemnation suit could be filed against us. That cause of action is actually recognized under Tennessee law, but of all the cases that I've read, and I've looked into this, none of them, the plaintiffs in each of those cases, none of them have ever been able to recover on their cause of action, on their theory. The courts just simply say, yeah, this is possible that you can sue on this type of theory, but we don't find it applied here. So I think they'd have a hard road to hoe in that regard. There are, when you look at the specific language of what you have before you, the first part that restricts it to 3 days a week, that's a little bit of an issue of concern. And I will say that language comes straight from the state statute, as Councilman Allen said, but there's been no case that has challenged that. And I suspect that the reason why is that probably that law that deals specifically with Sevier County was probably a result of a political compromise. I can't say this for certain, but I suspect that you had parties there that didn't want to have the racetrack, or they wanted to restrict the hours, and there probably were people, just like there are here, who didn't want any restrictions. And at some point, there must have been the local legislative delegation introduced the legislation that's now on the books. I feel fairly certain that most state legislators that did not live in Sevier County probably didn't have much of an interest in it. But because the local delegation said, here's a compromise, this is what we want to do, that's why they passed it. And the reason why I tell you all this is because that's probably why there's been no challenge to it. Because they had some kind of agreement or compromise. And so I can't tell you for certain that this law, which again, the language is pretty much straight from the state statute, that it will pass muster. I think it will, but I can't be certain. And that, the one part that is a concern is that the restriction about the days. I don't think the hours is really, I don't believe that's really challengeable. Because cities have a right under the police power to pass rules and reasonable rules and regulations that pertain to noise and that deal with public health and welfare.
Our eyes are glazing over.
Sorry, Mayor.
Well, just
Okay.
but I think to go back to what you initially said, but I asked, is there a potential for litigation here? And I think
Yes.
what you said is that I would like to meet you. There are certain situations where I can meet with you guys outside of public, and one of those is when there's potential litigation. I would like to do it.
I can do
And
that.
No, but I mean, is that? I mean, it seems to say that you think there's a potential for litigation.
I
based
believe
on-
there's definitely potential for litigation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Let's see here. Mr. Red?
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, one point I would like to make out, with all due respects to the council and everybody in attendance, there's countless occasions where the business has come first, and then the regulation has come after the business has been there. When I was a boy, I can remember we had the drive-in theater in Shelbyville, and then that had been there a long time before, and then it had to be regulated because at certain times it went past 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning, they asked it to be regulated. So with all due respects to everybody, I would say that most of the business regulations that do occur, that business was already in place. Then there was a need for a municipality to kind of tweak a regulation into it. One thing I kind of object to too, and I've heard this on many occasions since I've been on the city council, since the first time I've got here, no matter what a project is, whether it's a government project or anything else, is that kids have nothing to do. That's why either the government needs to put something here or whatever, because where else will they go? They're going to go out and rob and commit crime or whatnot. But I think this is just a problem in general with our society, and it's a big lack of parenting. And I don't think that we should be subject to the rules that we make over something because somebody can cry that this prevents child crime. I've heard a lot of talk of the mufflers or the street-ready mufflers that you can just go and buy, that's the same type muffler that comes on your car. The thing is, and it's no louder than the car that goes down the street. But remember, the car that goes down the street close to where I live on Dover Road, it goes down the street. These cars are stationary or in a circle in a particular area, and they're there all at once, and they're winding out the engines. And I would submit to you that the mufflers today are much more sophisticated than what they used to be 45 years ago whenever they first started racing. And a lot of the impact and the great thing about racing is the sound. That's why a lot of people go there. And I know where I live, close to Dover Road, I can hear on Saturdays the race cars going. It's not loud where I live, but it's nonetheless, I'm just submit to my fellow council members, it's louder than just the car going down the road at night because of going in the circle there. And the city attorney said, yes, whenever it applies to a certain business, whether it's in our noise ordinance or anything else, we can make some reasonable rules. That was his quote. We can make a reasonable rules. I think Councilman Allen pointed out that in Sevierville, and I did find on the internet myself, there are some rules pertaining to racetracks and racetracks alone in other municipalities. I think the question that we have in front of us, should we have any rule? That is for Mr. Allen's constituents that maybe have an annoyance problem with the sound. If we say we're going to have no rule whatsoever, that's kind of a slap in their face. And as Mr. Allen pointed out, we don't want to go so strict where it would cause an undue burden on the racetrack. And he came, I think, Mr. Allen did, Councilman Allen, with 12 o'clock, or 12:30, I'm sorry, on Friday. And at the executive committee meeting, if I remember correctly, when I asked, would you be for 1 o'clock, he said, yes, if I have to be, I'd be for 1 o'clock. So with that said, I'd like to make a motion, Mayor, for the Midnight Madness time that is in here in the ordinance document in front of us. I'd like to amend that to be 1 o'clock instead of 12:30.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor to amend ordinance 31 to read 1 o'clock rather than 12:30. Is there a second? Second. Okay, there's a second for that. So there is a second. So ladies and gentlemen, you now are here to discuss only the amendment, not ordinance 31. You're only going to discuss the amendment of moving the ordinance from 12:30 to 1 o'clock. So now there's a motion on the floor to move the time to 1 o'clock. Any discussion about moving the time to 1 o'clock and amending the ordinance to say that? Not any? It's about the amendment? Okay, thank you. You were on there about the other one, I didn't know. Okay, thank you. Ms. Johnson?
My question is, I know you've had discussion with Mr. Scoggins, is 1 o'clock something that he would agree with?
Originally, during our meeting, he said give me 1 o'clock. In the public safety meeting, he said 1 o'clock. Now, from what I read in the newspaper today, and but from what I've heard out of his mouth, he said yes.
Okay. Any other discussion about the 1 o'clock time frame? You can hit about that now. You talked about that. Okay. There were several of you on here about the original ordinance. No one else wants to speak about the 1 o'clock, or you want to speak about the 1 o'clock? Okay, 1 o'clock to Mr. Harris.
If I could, Mayor, I must make sure the council completely understand the process of racing. It's like a football game. You don't stop a football game at halftime and say they've ran enough. That's it. The game is over. Racing is the same thing. If you have two vehicles going down the track, sometime by putting a time frame in it, and I don't want to get into details about the muffled vehicles no more after 12, but the point is, what if the entry is 50 vehicles, 25 races? You only make one pass within an hour by the time those vehicles go down the track. So it's pretty hard to regulate a time. It sounds great for the neighbors. I mean, it sounds great. It really sounds great to put a time on it. But it's the same as cutting a sport event. This is a sport that you would be limited to. A guy would come in at 12 o'clock, ready to race. He would make one pass, and it's 12:30. He won't make another pass. In other words, the Camaro only races. The Ford, you wouldn't be able to get that competitive edge of racing if you put a time limit on it. Sometimes being unlimited with these muffled vehicles, that you actually can make a couple passes. So I think the council must understand this is a sport that's competitive, whereby limiting the time would be equivalent to cutting off a football game at halftime.
Okay, any other discussion about the moving to 1 o'clock? Seeing none. You're now going to vote on the amendment. All you're voting for now is to move it to change the time to 1 o'clock. So if you want to, you're not voting for or against the ordinance. You're only voting to add in the ordinance that the closing time, should it pass, be 1 o'clock. Press your selection. Yes for 1 o'clock. No for 1. No if you don't want it. Clear the, okay, I vote yes for the 1 o'clock. Okay. Now you're at 1 o'clock on ordinance 31 instead of 12:30. Now, we're back on the discussion of ordinance 31 as amended to 1 o'clock as compared to 12:30. Mr. Burkhart?
Members of the council, I see that this has been there for 45 years. We kind of moved in as a city around them. They didn't move in on us. I have a whole lot bigger problems with Lowe's or Walmart's in that, in parking lots and lights and things like that. I think they disturb more big box stores. I shouldn't point out just those two, but any big box store with the lighting, they come in and they get hit. They come right against neighborhoods and things. The tractor trailers, they move all night. So the lighting, their parking lots are usually lit 24 hours, right against neighborhoods. There's usually loading and unloading going on most of the night. So I would encourage the rest of the council to vote no on this.
Mr. Lewis,
Mayor, I call for question.
questions called for. I'll get you. Is there a second to call to cease discussion?
Second.
Second. Ms. Johnson was, Candy Johnson was in prior to the call, so Ms. Johnson, you can speak on ordinance 31 as amended. You're on. You're on. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, you're back on.
Okay. This may be for Lance. I know the days of the week, I don't really see government being able to regulate the operation days of the week as far as a business is concerned. So I'm a little iffy about that, and I know you didn't want to really go into detail about litigation and so forth, but I don't think that the days of week should be in there. But my question to Councilman Allen is, if the noise is of concern, had you ever considered putting in an ordinance that street legal vehicles couldn't be raced? I mean, only street legal vehicles could be raced after a certain time? I don't know a lot about racing, but from my understanding, Mr. Scoggin says that those are the only types of vehicles that are raced after a certain time anyways.
Any other comments? The question's been called for, and the motion on the floor to cease discussion.
Can Councilman Allen answer?
Can't discuss them
Okay, well, I'll vote no.
any further. Okay, the rule says that when the question's called for, there'll be a vote to cease discussion. If you don't want to cease discussion, vote no. If you want to cease discussion, vote yes. There's a motion to cease all discussion and move to a vote on ordinance 31. Press yes if you want to cease discussion, no if you don't. Okay, discussion is ceased. What you have in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, is ordinance 31 as amended to 1 o'clock. Time to vote. Please press your selection. Yes to approve ordinance 31, no to disapprove it. Ordinance 31 fails. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, ordinance 31 has failed. And those of you that want to stay, you're welcome to stay. Those that are wanting to leave, we're going to give you just a moment to leave to let others come in. Thank you very much. Excuse me, how about, Madam Clerk, let's do the consent agenda. Hopefully there's no one there. These are all second readings. So you want to read those and get those, dispense with those?
Ordinance 21, 2009-10, second reading, amending the zoning ordinance and the official code of the city of Clarksville relative to Madison Street Corridor Urban Design Overlay. Ordinance 29, 2009-10, second reading, amending the 2010 Clarksville Fire and Rescue operating budget for insurance proceeds for damaged equipment. Ordinance 30, 2009-2010, second reading, authorizing exercise of right of eminent domain to obtain easements and rights of way for rails to trails, Clarksville Greenways. Ordinance 33, 2009-2010, second reading, authorizing exchange of property with Austin Peay State University. Ordinance 34, 2009-2010, second reading, authorizing a contract between Clarksville Parking Authority and First Presbyterian Church. Ordinance 35, 2009-2010, second reading, authorizing purchase of property for the Beacon Hills Pump Station. Resolution 21, 2009-2010, renewing a certificate of compliance for Ashok K. Bagshan Favorite Liquors, 601 South Riverside Drive. Adoption of minutes September 3rd.
And second, any discussion on consent agenda? Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Consent agenda is approved as read. They're all in?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, now moving on to zoning. Mr. Grubbs?
Thank you, Mayor.
I got you. I gotta get organized here.
Sir, there's a few more that snuck in on.
Okay, Madam Clerk, will you please read ordinance 39 and 40, please?
Ordinance 39, 2009-2010, first reading, amending the zoning ordinance and map of the city of Clarksville, application of Paul and Sarah Matura, John Davidson, Keller Williams Realty Agent, for zone change on property at Scenic Drive and Vaughn Road from R1 Single Family Residential District to O1 Office Medical Institutional Civic District. Ordinance 40, 2009, 2010, first reading, amending the zoning ordinance and map of the city of Clarksville, application of Charles T. and Pamela M. Geralds for zone change on property at Bellamy Lane and Warfield Boulevard from R1 Single Family Residential District to C2 General Commercial District.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mayor, I move we go into public hearing.
And second, is discussion for public hearing, say aye. For those opposed, we're going to go in public hearing. Okay, those in the audience who would like to speak in favor of ordinance 39, please come forward.
Sir, you may want to wait, things snuck in on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's hold on a little bit. It's a little unique tonight. We apologize. I certainly would appreciate security.
Mayor, if I could, I'd like to make an announcement about the zoning.
Yes, sir,
It's
please.
in the book, but just for the members in the gallery tonight, ordinance 41 was withdrawn, so it will not be heard tonight.
Okay, thank you. Everyone in? They're all in? Okay. Those here tonight to speak in favor of ordinance 39, which is amending the zoning ordinance and map of the city of Clarksville, application of Paul and Sarah Matura. Those in favor of that, please come forward. Please state your name. There'll be two allowed to speak.
John Davidson, Keller Williams.
My name is Paul Matura.
Okay. Any comments?
Yes, sir. We are proposing rezoning this property to O1 office space. And we feel that the corner is separated and will not affect the integrity of that neighborhood.
Okay. Any questions of Mr. Davidson? Thank you. Mr. Matura?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Paul Matura, and I am the owner of the property in question. I'm requesting the zoning change primarily because directly across the street from my home is now completely commercial, C4 and O1 property. I have 175 feet of frontage on Vaughn Road. 100 feet of that is O1. The other 75 feet of that is C4, and that extends to Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard, or 76. The O1 also extends another 200 feet up Vaughn Road into the neighborhood. To the right of my house is a strip of undeveloped R1 property, followed by 300 feet of C4 property that takes it down to Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard. Directly behind my house is another area of undeveloped R1 property. The individual who owns this property is not opposed to the zoning change on either side. That undeveloped property goes 500 feet behind my house before there's another house. Directly across the street is the only developed area, and that belongs to Mr. Norman Skiba, and he does not oppose this zoning change. As a member of the Neighborhood committee, which I was a member of the neighborhood committee in the past. I've opposed numerous zoning changes along Martin Luther King Boulevard and Vaughn Road. As a group, we as a neighborhood committee had decided that 01 was the least of the commercial evils. And as a group, we decided that we would not oppose the zoning change from R1 to O1, which was directly across Vaughn Road from myself. Unbeknownst to me, this area got completely leveled. And now, 1 mile away, I-24, I can see from my front porch. So I have all of this open area in front of my house. This has drastically reduced the value of my house on the residential market. It is my understanding that when this proposal went to the planning committee, the planning committee, that the street department had said the only way, if the property was rezoned, the only egress to the property would be from Scenic Drive, which is the side street. According to the street department, we cannot, or a person could not appeal where that egress would be until a site plan was in place. A site plan, for me, as someone trying to sell a property, a new site plan with a changed zoning code is just not practical for me. It's also very difficult for me to sell it to a commercial purchaser who would design a site plan with an egress from Vaughn Road as opposed to Scenic Drive until the property is rezoned. Based on what we have had in the past from our neighborhood group and the statements that were made while I was fighting these zoning things, and we've said that 01 was okay. And then I looked across my street, and I have all this light and noise and things coming in that I did not expect. And again, I suppose it's my fault. But I'm appealing to you for this zoning change simply because I'm trying to sell my property, and the value of the property has drastically decreased because of what I see across the street. And so I would ask for your serious consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone here to speak in opposition to ordinance 39? Please come forward. We'll allow 2 people. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Laura Schrader, and I live at 718 Vaughn Road. And myself and Mr. Fickle is going to speak on behalf of the neighborhood with the concerns that we have. Thank you. With the zone request change. As several of you have been with us through this whole process, we've been dealing with this issue along with Mr. Matura since 2003 with the zone request change along the Martin Luther King Boulevard. And one of the biggest issues that we have seen as a concern is certainly the traffic. And with any new development, you always have increased traffic flows throughout the neighborhood. So in addition to the people coming and going, we also have the new development, the Willow Chase, which is Mr. Elliott's old property that has increased traffic circulation throughout. One of the things that we had learned through and Mr. Matura has already mentioned this, at the Planning Commission meeting last week, was that the Street Department has asked that all of the traffic flow will be redirected over to Scenic Drive, and the map will show you the relationship of Scenic Drive as you come into the neighborhood. And we felt that it's just entirely too invasive into the neighborhood to have that flow that comes through it. Also, with the zone changes that were requested as part of the success of the neighborhood, we were able to defeat the zone request change with Mr. Elliott several times. And then as a consensus to be able to make it a win-win situation with everybody, a representative with Mr. Elliott came to the neighborhood and had asked what can we do to make this a situation where we can get the rezoning as well as protect the neighborhood? And part of that resolution was to have the parcel, or leave a portion of his parcel, R1, and act as a buffer between the C5 development and Mr. Matura's property. And so then, again, that was just a recognition of the win-win situation, as well as the trying to preserve the neighborhood and protect it. And one of the photographs, or actually two of the photographs, I think it's number 1 and number 2, shows that buffer that has been preserved to help protect him. Finally, and a good example on the map shows that we consider the R1 development is our neighborhood, and as you're coming into our onto Vaughn Road, to the left you have the C5, then R1, and then the requested zone change. So in our opinion, it tends to, I guess, work against the integrity of the neighborhood by allowing the O1 that's within there. So we hope that you see fit to join us in not rezoning and leaving it as R1 and saving the integrity of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, normally we do ask if there's any questions, so when they all four get through, if you have any questions of any one of the four, I'd be glad for you to ask them. Sir, would you like to come forward, Rocky?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Frank Sickle, and I reside at 2840 Scenic Drive. Although I could point out all the great aspects of our neighborhood and why the majority of the residents oppose this zoning, instead I'm going to address the request itself and why we feel it's just an out-and-out bad idea. In the Planning Commission meetings, Mr. Mature and his agent originally argued the point that there was a specific need for more commercial real estate in our area. And so I'd just like to counter that claim by saying there really is an overabundance of commercial property in our area that is completely undeveloped. And adding more to it is probably going to hurt the need for that property in itself. Across the street from Mr. Matura's property, on up Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard up towards Highway 24, there is 20 acres of undeveloped commercial and office property. On the other side of Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard, near the Vaughn area, heading east and west up Martin Luther King Parkway, there's another 40 acres of undeveloped commercial real estate. If you follow Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard up towards Highway 24 to the east, around exit 11, there is a restaurant and a gas station that are both vacant, from what I've been told, have been vacant for up to 4 years, and nothing has moved into that property. Also heading westward on Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard towards the north is even more plots of land of undeveloped commercial real estate. And so I would say there's really no need or claim for more undeveloped real estate in our area, as opposed to the specifics of Mr. Matura's property. And if it would offer more to the commercial real estate in the area, I would say it offers very little. It is 0.8 acres with a residence on it, surrounded by 3 sides of residential zoning. And it has, right now, the Street Planning Commission has said that access should be from Scenic Drive, which is an interior road within our neighborhood. So I would say with all those points, there's really very little need for more commercial property within our neighborhood. More importantly, and specifically, due to the size of the property, less than 1 acre, due to the location of the property, which is surrounded on 3 sides with residential zoning, and due to the limited access to Scenic Drive, and more to the true motives of this. The true motives we believe in this is really to increase profit for Mr. Mature and his agent on his property. And if you look at the size, the location, and the motives, there could be a case made for spot zoning in this if it is approved. And finally, Mr. Mature also claimed to lose significant property value on his property. Again, this is an allegation that I don't think he can substantiate. The 2009 city taxes really value his property very significant within our neighborhood. He is one of the few houses that actually his lot is not a lot within a subdivision, even though it is surrounded by our subdivision. So his lot is worth twice as much as my lot, which is directly behind his, even though his is half the size of my lot. And so according to the state of Tennessee, the tax assessment, I see where no value has been lost on his lot. And that's off mere speculation of what is going to be developed in the future around his area. Barring any questions, that's all I have, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Rocky. Are there any questions of any one of the four? Mr. Harris.
I have one for the street department. Is it a fact that the entrance of this rezoning would be on Scenic?
Our comment at the zoning was that if it does get rezoned and it does develop, our initial input is gonna be, yes, we're gonna look for it to be on Scenic. We look for the driveways to be put on the road with the least traffic count where we can. Until we have a site plan and a traffic study, that is the stance we have to take at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Burkhart?
My question is for Mr. Riggins. The 01, what they're asking for, can apartments and other things be built in 01?
Yes, sir, it can.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, but I have one for Mr. Ventura. Do you already have a plan for your land, or?
No, sir, I do not.
Have you done an appraisal on your land since the rezoning? Because you said you lost money, or you lost value. Have you done an appraisal on your, or has John done an appraisal?
We did an appraisal when we purchased property. I'm sorry, I should be speaking to the mic. We had it appraised when we purchased property last October, I believe it was. And
Have you done a CMA or anything since then, since the?
no, sir.
Because
we
you
have
said you lost money or something.
not. Based on real estate speculation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Those, let's see, that was the first one. Those to speak in favor of ordinance 40, please come forward. Those to speak in opposition to ordinance 40, please come forward. Ordinance 41 has been withdrawn. So that's it, Mr. Grubbs.
Okay, Mayor, I move to go back to regular session.
Okay, motion second to go into regular session. Those in favor of ceasing discussion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, back in regular session.
Okay, as a reminder, all motions upon advice of legal counsel shall be for approval. That's just a reminder. Okay, ordinance 39, the recommendation of the staff is for disapproval. The recommendation for the from the planning commission is for approval, and I so move.
And second, any discussion on ordinance 39? Mr. Summers?
Yes, sir.
To reiterate the things that the two speakers that were voting against it went through, but I want to just clarify, members of this council and probably been watching the council years beforehand, in each aspect, as the neighborhood has tried to work with developers, Mr. Mature has been a part of that, and he's had a voice in each one of those. And now he's sort of on the other side of the fence, so to speak, in terms of that. But every one of the issues which Mr. Matura has fought for to ask us not to support some of the rezonings are still good issues. They're still factual. They still apply, even though in this case now he's on the other side. In the negotiations on previous rezonings, the developer that did the strip mall, Clay Powers, built his. The developer understood the concerns of the neighborhood, and the lot that's in front of Mr. Matura's, that a couple 150 feet, whatever it is, that developer left that alone and did not ask for that to be zoned because he understood the neighbors and wanted to protect the neighborhood on that. The land behind Mr. Matura is R1. On the other side of the street is R1. Yes, across the street we've got O1. The neighbors worked on that. Mr. Matura was a part of that decision. And so the C4 that's down on the opposite corner, that was approved when much of us came in initially on the a couple of years ago. So I would ask that you vote against the rezoning on this because this has been up a number of times and we have tried to protect that neighborhood and the investment of the neighbors in there. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no one else, there's a motion on the floor for approval of ordinance 39. If you want to approve it, press yes. If you want to disapprove, press no. Okay. Ordinance 39 is disapproved.
Okay, ordinance 40, 2009, 2010, both the staff and the planning commission recommendations for approval, and I so move.
And second, any discussion on ordinance 40? Please press your selection. Candy Johnson, there you go, thank you. Okay, ordinance 40 is approved.
Mayor, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Grubbs. Okay, Mr. Baker, I need you to step up here a moment, please. Okay, I need a motion for reconsideration on ordinance 30 upon recommendation of your council. That's ordinance 30. That's the authorizing exercise of right of eminent domain to obtain easements and right-of-ways for rails and trails. Motion to reconsider. Is there a second? Okay. Those in favor of reconsidering, please say aye. Those opposed. Okay, it's back on the table. I think, Counselor, you want to just recommend okay. Okay, so now it's back on the table. It's not, it's being reconsidered. So would the motion to withdraw be appropriate? Let's make sure just a moment. Okay. Until yeah, because I would anticipate calling a special call meeting on this.
And it'll be for second reading next time, whenever you want to do it.
Would you allow us a motion to postpone? Okay. There's a motion to postpone. Is there a second? Any discussion? Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed. Okay. Ordinance 30 is postponed. And Counselor, you're going to, there was some language that you had some question about, and so you're going to try to correct the language and bring it back up for a vote on second reading? Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Evidently, Mr. Baker found it during the process tonight, so. Okay. No, second reading only.
With the changes, still
Yeah,
consider the second one.
Yeah.
What I will do is, I'll get with Mr. Binkley and correct the problems in it. We'll bring it back either at a special session or the next regular meeting, and I will announce to you that, okay, this is it's for you for second reading, and it's the language is gonna be different than what you had on first reading. There will need to be a motion to adopt the changed version.
Amend
Yeah.
ordinance 30.
Yeah.
We're going to amend ordinance 30, and then there'll be a motion to approve ordinance 30
That's
after
it.
amendment. Okay? So it would be on second reading. You're just postponing second reading only. Okay? All right. Bill and codes, Mr. Red?
Codes worked 542 complaints for September, Mayor. That is my report.
Good report, Mr. Red. Community Development Committee, Mr. Summers?
No report.
Good report, sir. Finance Committee, Ms. McLaughlin? Thank you, ma'am. Gas and Water Committee, Mr. Summers? Thank you, sir. General Services, Mr. Harris?
There's no report, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Parks and Recreation, Mr. Forrester?
No report.
Thank you, sir. Public Safety's been handled. Street Committee, Mr. Lewis?
Mayor, I'd like to say that the street department worked 1,732 work orders in the last quarter, on top of working with relative trails and other projects. Please know, the street department, they do have an alibi, sir. Remember Kids and Cops on October the 10th, Kroger, Kmart from 10 to 2.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Kids and Cops,
Kids and Cops,
October 10th, Kmart. Where? Out by the mall? Wilma Rudolph. Okay, sir. Anything else? Thank you, sir. Transportation, Ms. Johnson? You got it, ma'am.
transported 65,283 passengers in the month of September. We also transported 1,116 passengers for Riverfest, and transported 562 passengers for the grand opening for the Cumberland Greenways.
My gracious. Did you personally drive those buses, Ms. Johnson?
No, I didn't, Mayor,
Oh, okay.
but I have driven them.
You have driven?
I have.
Well, I've been asked to drive some buses, and I've been asked to drive some things around, and for those of you who question about that. Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
For those of us that have ridden in your car, we don't want you driving your buses.
Well, that's not very nice. Charter and Codes Revision, Mr. Red, moving right along. That's okay.
Item number one there, to the tree board and how we did the tree board, in the code revision, it's under ordinance 320910, I make a motion for approval.
Second, any discussion for ordinance 32? Seeing none, those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed. Ordinance 32 is approved. New business, before we bring up Clarksville Department of Electricity and their budget, I'd like to make a motion to get on the floor to approve ordinance 36. Discussion. Okay, would y'all come forward, Brian, Christie, Kim, and anyone else who'd like to come? Earl, I don't know if you want to come or not. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you may want to just ask any question that you may would want to have for them, and unless y'all have something prepared to say, are you?
Just one comment, and real quick, and then we'll take whatever questions you have. I just want to let everybody know that we do have our power board, that we have a budget and finance committee made up from that power board, and we have spent a lot of time with that finance committee going over the budget, and we spent a lot of times trying to cut that budget as much as we could, and they asked us to get our budget down to about a 6% cash basis to expenses, and we did cut that budget down to that amount this year. So we've made a lot of effort to make this a lean budget, and that's kind of, we have made some effort on this, and at this time, just whatever questions you might have, we'll try to answer for you.
Ms. Hatfield, you have anything you want to say?
Not in this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Summers?
Yes, sir. Got a couple items, I'll just pop one out right now. I believe you had mentioned last Thursday that there's no personnel cost listed on the telecom side. Is that correct? That you were drawing it out as it was spent, I guess, or something to that effect?
Kim, would you, as you speak, if you'd go to the microphone so the people in the audience can hear.
Our personnel is all paid by the electric division, and time is allocated to the telecommunications division based on the activities that the employee performs. In your packet, there's a listing of employees and how their time is allocated
Okay.
on the basis.
So in the operating expenses that you show, the $8,300,000, no, if I'm reading it correctly, that has no personnel cost in there, does it?
There is some personnel cost. Those allocated portions would be spread in the general and administrative expense, and then also in the network operations expense.
Okay, now, when you did that, I noticed you had some, I noticed, like, I guess I had a question. I noticed Christie was 60/40, but you're head of the telecommunications. Why would there be anything on the electric side, I guess is my question.
Because I also manage the customer service department, and the customer service staff manages the sales service and support for both electric and telecom.
You had a number of employees where you said you'd look at the work orders, timesheets, whatever the proper nomenclature is. How are those accounted for in here?
It truly depends on the employee, but for example, if you'll look at an employee that's listed as a Tier 1 operator, that's a person that works primarily in telecommunications, after hours, answering calls related to service and support, but they also take electric calls. So they have to keep a detailed sheet every night by customer, by account number, and the type of work that they did on that customer, and whether it was electric or telecommunications, and then each month we calculate that, and Kim allocates it based on that.
Okay, I guess that's where my concern is, because you had a number of those employees, I guess that sort of balance between the fence. Now, y'all been doing this about 2 years, close to it there. And I guess my question would be, in terms of a proposed budget then, that's possibly a considerable number of hours that are not documented right now in the initial budget. And my question is that if you've got a couple of years' experience, even if it was a factor of 20 or 30% on most of those people, that's a considerable amount of sum of money that's not showing up as an operating expense. And I'll just be honest with you, in my line of work where I've looked at accounts like that, it would worry me that the numbers could be manipulated. I'm not trying to accuse anything, but, you know, given the road we've been down on this thing, and given that we'll do it after the fact, really worries me. And if we're going to approve something, I think there ought to be some factor in there, because basically you had to borrow $4 million last year to balance the budget out of the electrical side. And, you know, if you're missing hundreds of thousands of dollars, these people's portions of salary, you know, instead of 8.3, maybe we're talking 9, or I don't know. And I don't think anybody here else would know what is that amount. I can understand adjusting down the road once you get the facts, but I think you ought to put some factor up front to account for it and then adjust it as it goes along.
With our being in the business and the time period that we've been in, we've really had 1 year of progressive business and progressive customer growth. And at this time, we can't really, when we're fully built out with our potential customer base, at that time, we can predict a steady percentage of allocation. But in a growing, in a customer growth period that we're on, we are actually allocating those costs to actually, as Christy said, someone that uses timesheets actually documents, there's a basis of documenting their time. Also, our budget for the telecommunications division is based on customers, because we can, as our customer base grows, those expenses also grow with that. And in our analysis that we provided to you, you can see as our customers grow, those expenses also grow with that increase of customers. So we felt that for this year, that we will be covered on the expense
I guess my
side.
concern was, if you were starting from scratch and you were doing only telecommunications, you'd have to come up with a budget on what it's going to cost to those people. Is that correct? I mean,
Correct.
Okay.
And we are, you know, the good thing about our business is that we're able to share employees for both sides of the business.
And that's what worries me. I think, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions or anything
That's
else,
fine.
but here again, the council's thrown itself in the middle of this thing, and I guess when I look at city budgets, I've looked at military budgets and business budgets, I've never failed to see that you cannot account, or at least make some guesstimate in terms of all your personnel needs. And I think that's a big hole right here. And my concern would be is we're advertising at 10,000 customers is the magic mark, that when we get above that, we're doing good. You know, is that 10,000 based on 8.3 million, or is that really based on maybe the cost is 9 million, or what? I think with what's happened, there really needs to be some kind of estimate of the total manpower or staffing required on that. So I'll shut up my mouth and let somebody else take on after that.
Well, one thing I will say, we are working with TVA on our business plan and modifying our business plan and going forward with this business. The business plan will also show what that number is and where we need to be to, you know, be cash positive and also be at the profit level. It will also account for if we need additional employees on both ends of the business. And we will share that plan with you when we complete that with TVA.
But by your accounting right now, this does not show the full cost of what it may cost to run telecommunications right now.
If we had an independent business of telecommunications, I don't think we can compare ourselves to a charter who is in business from scratch and is not sharing resources for both divisions.
Right. Okay, I just have to respectfully disagree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Redd? Yes, sir, Mayor, I just had a quick question for you or the folks here. Is it possible that we could put their budget on the same time our budget cycle is on, or would that be an undue
I
burden?
think that's the process. That's what we're gonna do next year. This,
Oh, okay.
we just changed this, the council changed all this for tonight.
It'd just be nice if we could have the same time whenever we do ours.
I've already discussed with them, they'll be making their same presentation as other departments will
Okay.
during the time of the budget cycle. Okay, Ms. McLaughlin?
First of all, I want to thank you all for working hard to get the other information included in the budget that we asked last week. I appreciate it. I have some questions on page 26 and 27. There are some employees listed as inactive because they're retired and their salary is still showing there.
Yes.
If they're retired, I'm confused as to why they're on this report.
Those employees still had accrued leave on the books that they're being paid for.
For a whole year for Mr. Spadlin?
There's 7 employees included in that number, and they will be paid out at the end of May.
Okay, all right, so there's.
Is
one,
the board addressing that?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
What are they addressing about that?
Right now, we have put together a committee of 3 board members, and actually, we are looking at all of our personnel policies. We found through some of the recent things that we need to relook at that. And that will be addressed, but we're just beginning work with our committee right now. But that is one of the policies that will be addressed.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. McLaughlin? Mr. Forrester?
As we discussed at the last meeting, there was some $5 million worth of portals with electronic panels stored in the parking lot, outside parking lot. I know you all are looking at those or inspecting them to see what kind of damage has been done. Do you have any idea about the percentage that you're seeing damage-wise?
We initially, because we began going through that process, and the initial groups that we were looking at were the ones, honestly, that were the ones that were most at risk, that had the most exposure to the environment. And initial estimates from our audit, so that we could close out our last year's audit, was 20%. We now think, as we've gotten into those, open those up, clean them up, and run some testing on them, that they are not as damaged. So I'm not prepared to say it's less than 20%, but I really do believe that it was not going to be any more than 20%.
Thank you.
Okay, Candy Johnson?
I couldn't find it in here. Maybe you can point me to it in this document, but what percentage of your budget is salaries and wages?
Page 10 lists the regular and overtime payroll.
Do you have a total amount?
What's the total amount of payroll? Okay, Kim's got a calculator, she'll figure it out.
It's 0.12% of our payroll. Is 0.12% of our payroll to our total budget.
Payroll is 12% of your total budget.
12. And what,
Yes.
I'm
It
just
can't be
curious.
12% of our total
Okay, thank
budget.
you.
That's fine. Okay, I'm just wondering, do you use, I know it's not, it must be unregulated or something, but do you use some type of pay scale when you hire people that are in the same tiers? Do you have some type of policy